Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, we proudly bring to you Mormonism Live!
Shut up and sit down.
Good evening, Mr. Real. How are you doing?
I am doing excellent. Folks, another episode of Mormonism Live. Radio Free Mormon and Bill Real here, and this is going to be a fun little ride tonight.
It is, and to start it off, it looks like Swanee guessed right. I'm wearing a Marvel t-shirt. I don't know how she figured out that that's what I'd be wearing, but she wins the prize for that. What are you wearing tonight?
I wore this shirt for a few minutes yesterday for my episode with Brittany Hartley. And this is just like a pastel, little artsy kind of button-down shirt I've got on.
Yeah, I don't think anybody got that.
My wife says I've gotten a little bougie as I've gotten older.
Oh, really? Well, I hope that's a good thing. It sounds painful.
It's not. It just means to, dress a little nicer, have a little nicer appetite, that kind of thing.
Well, that's good.
Yeah. So it's one of those things. I don't do much, and so having a few nice shirts is the thing I do.
Yeah, Bill, there's been one thing that's been going on. It's been a little bit in the news, at least in the blog vernacle, about a spate of sudden firings of CES teachers going on in the past week or so. What I've heard is kind of just rumor so far. I'm not sure that I know any facts about it. Did you want to talk about that?
I will only say that it seems deeply contradictory that the church is a huge fan of protecting pastoral confidentiality of child molesters and child abusers. But it also needs its BYU faculty to waive their pastoral confidentiality because it is not important there.
Right. And I think that we also want to just put a shout out. If there's anybody who has actually been on the short end of the stick in receiving a pink slip from being a CES teacher who wants to talk about it. In other words, if we have a direct witness, please reach out to Bill Real at Mormon Discussions, and you can give the rest of your email address.
Yeah, Mormon Discussions, plural, with an S on the end, podcast with an S on the end at gmail.com, or you can message me on Facebook Messenger, and we would love that. Like if you guys ever have some really juicy piece of information or are close to some of these things that happen, we would love to hear from you. It helps us create more well-rounded episodes.
Yes, and that's what we're into, well-rounded episodes.
You got it.
And speaking of well-rounded episodes, we've got a great show tonight with a wonderful guest. We're going to bring him on here in a second. His name is Richard Dutcher. He's done a lot of movies, but we're going to be talking about 4 of them tonight. And 3 of them have already been produced and released. In fact, maybe some time ago. 22 years for the first one we'll be talking about, God's Army. Then a year later, he came out with Brigham City. And then in 2005, I believe it is, he did a sequel to God's Army 2, also called States of Grace. I have made a point of watching all 3 of those movies in the past 4 or 5 days in preparation for tonight's show. I had watched them all before, much closer in time to when they came out. But there's something about watching them again and knowing that I'm going to have to try and be talking about them in a semi-intelligent fashion that makes me pay a lot of attention. And as I watch all of these movies, there is so much in them. There's so much depth, there's so much richness. And we're going to talk about that tonight, along with Richard Dutcher's faith journey. And we'll see if we can pack that all into 60 or 70 minutes. If we bring Richard Dutcher on now, that'd be great. There he is. The man, the myth, the legend. And he even has his own soundtrack. You carry your own soundtrack with you wherever you go, Richard?
I hope that's not me. I've never heard that music before. So.
That was definitely me. That's the alarm getting set at Family Pond for the night.
Oh,
I have this kind of theme music that plays in my head all the time, wherever I go. I think it's the theme from The Incredibles. So anyway, Richard, thank you for coming on tonight. Are you in Los Angeles now or Utah?
I'm in Salt Lake City, Utah right now. So I'm about a block and a half from the LDS temple. as we speak. So I'm right downtown.
Wow. Okay. Well, fantastic. I'm glad you're here. Can we start talking about God's Army? I want to
Yeah,
talk about
sure.
God's Army, and I already mentioned it, Brigham City, States of Grace, and then another movie that you currently have in, I think, pre-production. Is that the correct term to use?
Well, I'm in the financing phase now. So technically it would be the development phase.
Oh, okay. The development phase. Great. We want to talk about that as well, but leave enough time to talk about these other movies and how it tracks your spiritual progress. Because I remember I was talking with you on the phone the other day. We've had several phone conversations. You've been very generous with your time, and I appreciate that. But I remember broaching this question with you, I think it was a few days ago, about whether you think that your movies have in any way tracked your spiritual growth and development. And I sort of remember your response was, "Oh God, yes."
Yeah, I don't know if that's an exact quote, but pretty close. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Thank you. Well, let's start with the very first one that we're going to be talking about. I know it's not your first movie that you made,
Right.
but God's Army back in 2000. Why was it that you decided to make a movie about Mormon missionaries?
Well, I'll try to give you the quick run up to it. Is I had been in Los Angeles for about 10 years, just trying to be an independent filmmaker. I'd actually made a low budget feature called Girl Crazy, which was a romantic comedy, and I was just trying to showcase my abilities as a writer, as a director, as an actor, and but and so I made a film. I wrote it, I raised the money, and the entire budget of the film, and I shot it on film, was $55,000. So that it wasn't a lot of money, but for a recent college graduate, young married man with a kid, I was scraping together everything I had to make the film. But it had been like 5 years of just risk and hard work, and basically, I was having to carry the whole load myself. My wife at the time, Gwen, she was amazingly helpful, but it was it was a burden. And by the time I had finally finished it and I was able to arrange distribution, sold it to HBO and Cinemax, and but at the end, what I realized was it was just it was 5 years of my life that I had spent making something that was ultimately disposable. It was, it was basically, it was trivial. It was fun. It was funny. There were things it was my first film. So there's a lot of so many mistakes, so many things I learned from that film. But but what I realized was that I'd risked all of that. I had spent so much time, but in the end, after 5 years of my life, I'd made something that people would watch and chuckle, and then forget about it within 30 minutes. And I just, that is not, what I want my life to be. And also at the time I had, I was LDS. I was a returned missionary. I was very ambitious, though. I really, really wanted to be a filmmaker. And so I just went after that 100%. And I just found myself going down a path that I wasn't happy with. And in fact, I shared with you briefly that when I was meeting with a distributor on the film, after, of course, the film's finished and I was delivering it, saying, "Hey, let's find a place where we can sell this." And he was a Hollywood producer, distributor, salesman kind of guy, and he was just sitting in his office. And and by the way, he had just finished snorting a whole bunch of cocaine. And in the next room, they were cutting, porn for hotel rooms and for distribution in hotel rooms.
I hope not Marriott.
And so he's talking to me and he goes, "Oh, I love the film. It's a great title. And, I can sell this all over. What you got to do is you got to go in and every 7 or 8 minutes, we got to have some nudity. And so what I want you to do is just go back, spend 4 or 5 days and just shoot some nudities that we can cut in. We're going to sell this thing everywhere." And I was sitting across the desk from this guy, and it was just one of those moments, where I realized, where am I? What am I doing? And what am I doing with my life? This is not who I want to be. And by the way, I don't necessarily have an issue with, I feel like, as far as language and nudity and violence, I mean, they're all tools. So I'm not being like prudish about this or anything at all. I feel like, there are cases. I was just
Right,
like in
Porky's.
Holocaust films, you've got nudity where they're stripping down the guards. I mean, stripping down the prisoners. And so I don't feel like anything is off limits if done in the right way. So it's not about that, but it was just about me being in this place at the same time, thinking about how much time I had put into this and who was I? And so I walked out of I told him, no, I wasn't going to do it. And I walked out of the office and I just thought, I've got to figure my life out, because this is, I can't spend my life making these kind of movies that don't mean anything. And that's when I thought, you know what, I gotta get my act together. And so I started thinking about, giving up film, going and being a teacher, whatever. And then one day, I was, and that was kind of in my heart. I used to call that my Abrahamic sacrifice, where I was ready to just give it all up. It was like whatever God wanted me to do. And so I used to live right next to Warner Brothers in Burbank. And right next to it, I could step out and throw a golf ball over the wall if I felt like it, but which I never did. I should have done that. Maybe I'll have to go back and do that sometime. But I was there. I was barbecuing for my family. We had a tiny little apartment, and I had the Friday LA Times spread out, where every Friday I would read their movie reviews, because that was Friday. All the new movies would open, all the reviews were there. And I was reading all this stuff, and I was a little frustrated because I wanted to be a filmmaker, but I was looking at these movies, and at that time, this is like the mid late 1990s. There was a new movie coming out from for the Black community, and a new movie coming out for the gay community, and a new movie coming out for the Indian community. And I was seeing all this, and I actually was doing a little personal rant where I was saying, well, why can't Mormons have their own movies? It's like, we've got 12 million Mormons. Why can't we have our own movies? And that's when it hit me. And I just kind of sat down, let my burgers burn. And I realized, why can't we have, and that's when I just took off. People ask me a lot of times if I was trying to create a Mormon cinema, and I absolutely was from that moment when I realized, oh my gosh, why can't we have our own cinema? Mormons love movies, but nobody's making movies for them, and every time somebody depicts a Mormon in a TV show or a movie, it's totally off. It's a complete misrepresentation. And even if it's relatively benign or positive, they still don't get it right, And so that was something that drove me as well. It was like, it was time for us to start telling our own stories. And so that was my mission for the next, I don't think it was at all coincidental, but it took me 5 years to get God's Army financed and shot and made. But that was one of the things that drove me, was, feeling like Mormons have to tell their own stories, or other people will, and they're not going to tell them right. And I still think to this day that's a problem for the Mormon people. They need to be telling their own stories. They need better filmmakers, but that's what drove me to make God's Army. And so I just started hitting the road, raising money, pulling it together. Oh, and then the key to that, I think, was after realizing Mormons can have their own cinema, and I have just spent most of my life up to that point learning how to do this, thinking, what kind of story could I tell? And after toying around with a few ideas, I finally realized, nobody has told a real story about what it's like to be an LDS missionary. And that's what I had been. That was a very formative period of my life. And so I thought, I'm going to tell my story, and not so much the story of Mormon missionaries, but and in God's Army, and you've seen it recently. So basically what I did was I took my own story and I divided it up among these different missionaries. So in some ways, I was Elder Allen, the main character, the young kid whose stepfather had turned out to be a child molester. That was my story. And then the elder, the black elder who has the experience in Carthage jail. That was my experience. And then of course, a lot of me came out in the character that I played and throughout. So that's where it came from. And So in a lot of ways, when people ask me, and I was challenged afterwards whether people thought that I had the right to tell that story, a lot of people were like, well, did you have permission from the church to tell this story? And from the beginning, my response was like, what? Why would I need permission to tell my own story? And so that was a very long answer to your very short question.
If I can just jump in for 2 seconds, I won't do that a whole lot tonight, but I just want to say, when you said Mormonism is never really represented accurately, and you set about to do that, as somebody who was really excited about God's Army and went to see it in the theater, I agree. I think you represented the essence of Mormonism in that story really well. I just want to say that, like, you did do what no one else had done up to that point, and maybe from there on anyway.
Wow, thanks.
Yeah, and I remember when I watched it the first time, as well as more recently, that it really captured a lot of my mission as well, up to and including this fellow missionary who was having a real tough time. He was from Southern California, not Kansas. And he really missed his girlfriend. He really wanted to go home. And the other 3 missionaries, including me in the district, we were trying to talk him out of it. And it didn't work. He went home. Maybe we needed to have you write our lines for us. At least, because that happens twice in God's Army. One, you talk out of it and he stays, and the other one, you try and talk out of it and he goes. Yeah. And there's a whole cast of characters with all these different aspects of Mormonism. You've got Elder Dalton, which is your role, which is the very devout, work hard, let's do some good, which is your catchphrase, I think. Let's do some good. And then there are other missionaries who have a whole host of different backgrounds and issues. And then there's one, Elder Kinnicker, I believe it is, who is studying anti-Mormon literature while he's on his mission. And he drops hints about it throughout. Everybody's getting kind of fed up with him. And then it comes to a situation where your character finally has it and gets upset with him. By the way, you're playing a 29-year-old missionary in this movie. And I understand that that was a stretch in the sense of 29 is about as old as you can be and go on a mission, I think. Right. But you were still older than that even.
Right. Yeah, I was in real life. I was 35. So
35 playing 29, but you did a great job. And I'm not just saying that, actually. I thought I'd have a tough time faulting anybody's acting in this movie. I thought it was all very good and very well done. But I want to come to this point to talk about you and your character and how it relates to your development, because he starts talking very strongly to Elder Pinnaker about what Elder Dalton, your character, thinks about his involvement in the anti-Mormon literature. And we have a clip of that if we can play it. By the way, can I just say up front, for the good folks at YouTube, Richard Dutcher is the director and owner. This is his film. He owns all the rights to this film. So playing it here should not offend any YouTube censor personalities at all.
I own the copyrights.
Okay.
We shouldn't get in any trouble, right? So here we go.
Hey, did you guys know that Joseph Smith gave 4 different accounts of the first vision? Did you?
Man, why don't you put that stuff away, man? It's really starting to get on my nerves.
All right. Just thought you might want to learn about your own religion.
He gave different accounts because he was talking to different audiences, different circumstances.
Well, that must be why the first presidency never even mentioned that God and Jesus Christ appeared until after the 1900s.
It's not true.
It says it right here.
Look, it's not true. Orson Pratt and John Taylor both taught it repeatedly. Why don't you look it up in our books for a change? How many lies do you have to find in there before you're going to get it?
Just forget it, okay?
No, I'm not going to forget it. I mean, look at this stuff. I mean, who are these people? Don't they have anything better to do with their time? I mean, we got drugs, disease, people living out on the street, and these people spend their time trying to tear down other people's faith. And doesn't that give you a clue?
Okay. So what I wanted to ask you is how, first off, when I see that, I recognize that the person who wrote this is a person who is familiar enough with LDS history, and this is 22 years ago, to know that there are 4 accounts of the first vision, and that can raise an issue for certain people, and also be familiar with typical apologetic responses to that, which you articulate.
Right.
How much did that reflect your feelings at the time, and do you still feel the same way today?
Oh, it very much reflected my my feelings at the time. I was very I was always going down those, exploring what was available and stuff. But there's a big difference that I this came home to me recently here when I'm in Salt Lake City. Of course, I see young Mormon missionaries all the time, and you'd think, especially with my history and the fact that I look back on my years as a missionary as a very positive and necessary part of my own spiritual growth. And yet I look at these young guys, and I'm actually looking at them thinking, why are you here? How can you be here? And that may seem, strange considering my history, but you got to remember, I was a missionary in 1984 to 1986. And at that time, there was stuff if you really sought it out. There's no internet. We didn't have the internet. We didn't have, so we had, even in church books, there wasn't, a breadth of material available. So New Mormon history hadn't really it was just barely, getting moving. So there was such, compared to what we have today, there was so little.
Yeah, and I was saying it's not only just barely moving at that time, it was just recently got shut down.
Yeah.
With Leonard Arrington. So yeah, and you're very restricted in what you're able to read on your mission and still be in conformance with the mission rules.
Yeah, exactly. And of course, I was reading before and after my mission. I would, because it was something that was interesting to me. I was always very interested in Mormon origins, and so I always wanted to make a film about Joseph Smith someday. So I was always, eager to read whatever I could find about Joseph Smith, pro or con, and so. But at the time, what did we have? We had a marvelous work and a wonder that was like, fired us all up as missionaries. And, it's like, boy, that makes an argument for Mormonism. And how do you counter that, but as far as the anti-Mormon stuff, you really had to seek it out. And so it's not like it is today, and I do wonder when I see these young guys out there, I'm like, and this is the internet generation, it's like they've grown up with the internet their entire lives. And it strikes me as very odd. I really do want to sit down and in a very kind way say, have you never Googled Joseph Smith? Have you never really looked into Joseph Smith, polygamy, have you never looked into any of that stuff? I've yet to do that though. It's, but the point being, your question is like, yeah, I was quite the apologist in the period when I made God's Army. And I thought, and I pretty much, I was pretty good at it. You could have asked me anything and I could have given you a good, reason why it really wasn't a problem. I mean, even if you go down to, Joseph Smith having a relationship with Orson Hyde's wife, I could have, that was one that threw me, by the way. It was like, it took me a while to work out how I could possibly justify that one. But that's how committed of an apologist I was. I even had a good answer for that one. So, but the way I describe it now, and I don't want to get off on this, but I think a great way is what really occurred to me in retrospect is, and the way a lot of Mormons, especially apologists, approach these Mormon issues is, I think of it like a forest where you look at, there are individual trees, and one tree is the blacks and the priesthood. One tree is the gender issues. One tree is polygamy. One tree, and it goes on, and the first vision, and the priesthood being restored or not. And
there's a whole forest, isn't there?
Exactly. And you can take any one of those trees and you can argue it to death, and you can argue it to the point where, you can get to if you're a good debater, if you're a good attorney, you could argue it to the point where you're like, okay, we've settled this, that it's like, well, you could go this way or you could go that way. Now let's move on to the next tree. And then you can spend another, 3 weeks arguing about that tree, and you get to the same point when eventually it's like you throw up your hands and it's like, well, we've we've confused the issue enough and brought in everything, and so let's just move on to another tree. But eventually, when you step back and you look at the whole forest, there's only one answer that answers all, and that is, it's just not true. And so once that hits, you realize that you were lost in the individual trees. If that makes any sense, if that is clear.
Oh, absolutely. Now, when I watched this movie, as I said, I saw it reflecting extremely accurately a lot of my experience on my mission. And I see in it not only myself, but other missionaries that I knew. So it was surprising to me when you told me that not all Mormons were thrilled with this movie, especially since it seems so faith promoting. I mean, your character, Elder Dalton, is the one who's the faithful missionary. We just saw part of it there. And he's the one who at the end gets the divine imprimatur of authority and blessing from God by being the one who does a priesthood blessing on Benny, who's just gotten the crap kicked out of him. And also, even before that, has difficulty walking. He walks with a brace. And you heal him and he gets up and he walks. So it's very clear to me what the message was and who was being favored as far as their missionary attitude. And that was Elder Dalton. But not all Mormons saw it as faith promoting. Is that right?
Oh yeah, there's. I was so confused when I came out. When I had finished the film, nobody even in Utah knew I'd made it. It was just a little independent movie I made down in Los Angeles. Most of the cast and crew were not LDS at all, so very few people knew that I had made this film. And I just came up. I started, I created my little distribution company, started booking it into theaters. And, started placing trailers and posters in the theaters and put it out. So I kind of just sprang it on the Mormon culture. And I'm sure that included the leadership who were like, what the hell is going on? Suddenly there's a movie in the actual real movie theaters that's about Mormons.
I muted myself and you were talking about the church leaders. All of a sudden there's a movie and nobody asked us for permission.
Exactly. And, so there was quite at the beginning, I would get that question all the time because I would do screenings, whether it was for the press or for try to get some people to come see it so the word would spread. And so I would do pre-release screenings. And then even after I was opening it, we slowly rolled it out. So it went, all across the country and into Mexico and Canada. But I would go to the theaters to answer questions about the film, afterwards, do a little Q&A. And people were so confused when it was like they didn't know if they should like it, if they didn't even know if they should be in the theater watching it because they, in fact, one of my favorite stories of my entire career was when the trailer had begun playing in theaters in Utah. And it was still maybe 3 or 4 weeks before the movie was going to open. And I was at Jordan Commons. I was carrying the prints of the movie to the theater. I was taking posters to the theater myself. I was hitting all the movie theaters, driving all over Utah doing this, a little distribution company of like 3 of us. And so when I was in the theater and I knew that the trailer was playing in front of a certain movie, I would go in and watch it, right? So I go into Jordan Commons. It's the big theater. So it's like, 600 people. And I don't know what they're watching, some Hollywood, popular movie, probably Lord of the Rings or something. And I'm just at the bottom. And so I'm right, at the entrance before you walk up and go into the auditorium. So I can look back and pretty much see the whole place. And I see this woman, she's kind of a heavy set woman, middle-aged, and she's got, like a couple of popcorns and a drink in her hand. And she's trying to make her way across the row into the center. So there's all these people that are scooting back to give her space. And the trailer for God's Army comes up just as she starts to walk into the aisle. And as she gets like maybe 4 people in, suddenly Elder Allen in the trailer comes up and they refer to him as Elder. And she turns and looks at this. It was almost like her head snapped, and she just, boom, her head went to the screen and she froze right there. And it was a long trailer. I had to get special permission to play it. It was like 3 minutes long. And most of them are like 2 to 2.5. The whole time she did not move. I mean, she was planted just staring at this movie screen like aliens had just landed. And the people around her were like trying to, scoot around to see her. And actually, that's when I knew I'd known the whole time that this movie was going to work. But as soon as I saw that, I was like, this movie is going to work. But then, yeah, the response after that was amazing, where it was like, but mostly I would usually get people saying, did you ask the church, did you ask permission to make this film? And I would get people saying, how does the church feel about this? And the first few times that happened, I was very confused because, again, like I said, I didn't feel like I needed permission to tell my own story. And that's how I would answer. And I would just kind of jumble around. But then one time at a screening, and it was important. It was an important little moment in the history of the film because Elder David B. Haight's wife had come to that screening, and I knew she was there. I'd met her briefly, but they said, "Oh, come meet Elder Haight's wife," and so I did. Really sweet lady, and so she and her friends were watching the film, and then afterwards in the Q&A, someone brought up the same question. It was like, "How does the church feel about this?" And for the first time, I answered in this way, which is how I always answered afterwards. I said, "Well, you're the church. How do you feel about it?" And Sister Haight started clapping, and then everyone turned, and then it was almost like a little seal of approval, and that made me happy, because it was like, great, it's like great. I was thinking these guys must get tired of everyone running to them with asking permission for things. But there was that. But I think maybe what you'd be most interested in is what I thought I was going to catch hell over was, I thought for sure, bringing up the anti-Mormon issues, bringing up the blacks in the priesthood issue, bringing up that kind of stuff. In fact, I thought they were going to run me out of town on a rail because of the line where Elder Kinniger, the one who's reading the anti-Mormon literature, there's a scene late at night where the young, fresh, new missionary walks in and he sees Kinniger at the kitchen table with his head down, and he's been reading his stuff, and he says, what if it's, oh, what's going on, Maeve?
Oh, she's just waiting for you to finish her story, and
Oh,
then she's going to
sorry.
add something.
I was muted. I was going to say I have that scene if you want to play it.
The one about him with his head down?
The bus station scene.
Oh, no, that's not it.
Yeah, it's the one with his head down in the apartment. It's okay. I didn't ask you to get this one, Maven.
No problem.
But thank you. But yeah, where he's got his head down on the desk because the weight of it is just so heavy on Elder Kinniger. Right. And then he says, he says, damn them.
Yeah, he says, what if it's not true? What if they know, he's talking about the apostles, and the prophets. And he says, what if they know it's not true and they're lying to us? And he says, damn them, if it's not true, damn them to hell. And I thought, they're going to fry me over this one. Nobody, not in all the screenings I ever had anywhere in North America did I ever have anybody mention that. Nobody had a problem with that. What they had a problem with was me showing a missionary sitting on the toilet, because there's a little joke where the missionaries are playing pranks on each other, and they would burst in while the missionary's on the toilet and take a picture of him. They just thought that was funny, which is the kind of stuff that missionaries do, by the way.
And no full frontal nudity, by the way.
No nudity. They're long white shirts, very chastely covered everything. And it was funny. But they had an issue with that. And they had an issue with me showing ordinances on the screen. Like they had a big issue with, a lot of people had a big issue with me showing the anointing of the sick and the prayer, the healing prayer. And even, showing the baptism. You see, at the time, people don't really understand this now, but in the year 2000, sounds like I'm talking about the 1900s. I basically am. Mormons didn't have that. It was God's army. The first time they saw anything other than an institutional film about Mormons, really, anything that was made by Mormons, and it was, that was made for Mormons, certainly. And so they were not used at all to seeing a baptism. Later, I really laid it on them with Brigham City, but so they were shocked by that. They just didn't know what to make of that, and it's like they were watching it, they didn't know if they were watching something good or bad, and they were waiting for some leader to tell them whether it was right or wrong, and nobody ever did. So, well,
another interesting thing. And I'm sorry, I know we're spending a lot of time on this. We'll probably have to give a little bit of short shrift maybe to Brigham City. I apologize in advance, but every missionary, everybody who's been on a mission knows that that's what a mission is like.
Right.
And they recognize those people.
Right.
But I had done an interview, I think it was a couple of years ago now, with John Williams, who had, it's a different John Williams, not the composer, but he was a missionary, and he'd written a book, and he talked about this unwritten rule that we have in Mormonism, is that return missionaries are never to say anything about their mission except for faith promoting things. They're never to say anything that happened that was negative or not positive.
Right.
And I think that you broke that rule with God's Army.
Yeah, there was a screening, a very memorable experience where after one of the screenings, one of the very early screenings, this woman came up to me, and she was very distressed. It was like she was very troubled by something. And so I stepped aside so I could talk to her, because I didn't know if, we both knew someone who had died, or, I didn't know what was going on, but it was like, I wanted to give her some attention because she was in some distress. And then she told me that she had come to see the movie, and she had brought her two sons, one who was a recently returned missionary, and then one who was just about to go. And again, I'm not seeing a problem. And then she says, and the older son had, after the screening, had said that this was just like his mission, that it was just, this is what a mission is like. And he was enthusiastic. And again, I'm not seeing what the problem is. And then she says to me, she says she wished she hadn't brought her younger son, because now he might not want to go. And I didn't know what to make of that. To me, it was like, what? I had to process that. It was like, so basically, they don't want the guy who's about to give 2 years of his life to something to know what he's actually about to go do. It was wild. It was strange. And I comforted her as best as I could, but I doubt she saw States of Grace.
Probably not. But it points up this very interesting aspect of Mormonism, that all young men, ever since I joined the church in 79 and before then, are encouraged strongly to go on a mission. Nowadays, they're saying they don't even have the agency to choose to go on a mission, because they already made that decision when they got baptized. So they're really trying to force people down the cattle chute into the mission field.
Wow.
And yet, Mormons who have not been on a mission have no idea what a mission is like.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, good. They should see my two missionary films, and the one I'm getting ready to make. So that'll.
Oh, absolutely. Okay, moving on. Very good. Brigham City, fantastic movie. It comes out the next year.
Right.
2001.
Yeah,
and
I was so eager to. I mean, as soon as God's Army worked, and the newspaper. I mean, it was. In fact, for the year 2000, it was the fourth of all movies, Hollywood movies. It was the fourth most profitable movie of the year. So taking the budget, because it as an independent film, it made.
So that's percentage wise with the budget.
Yeah. Percentage of budget to profit.
Okay.
It was one of the most profitable films of all films made that year, including anything that my former neighbors, Warner Brothers, had made. So I was happy about that. They still didn't call me and ask me to work for them, but that's how it goes.
So we get to Brigham City, and once again, I'm sorry, we're going to have to skip a little bit about the concept and how you got that, and I apologize. But Brigham City, it's a different movie in some ways. In some ways, it revisits some of the themes. It is an absolute thriller. It's a solid thriller, whodunit, mystery, serial killer. Got to find him. But that wasn't enough for you.
No, in fact, I had some people who were critical of the film because of the mystery elements. They said, it wasn't the best mystery movie, and I said, well, it wasn't it was a spiritual drama. I was just disguising it as a murder mystery. So, neener.
Look, I may not be the sharpest tool in the box, but I did not see that coming. And you cloaked it so carefully, and watching it more recently, because I know the answer, I know who did it. And I'm just going,
but don't give it away. We still have some people that haven't seen it. So,
okay. So we won't do the spoiler.
Don't do the spoiler.
Just masterfully, absolutely masterfully. Even at the end on the second watching, I thought he was going to, somewhere else.
Oh,
I had no idea. I thought it was that gal's boyfriend.
Cool. Well, as just speaking as a movie maker now, it's like I love the when I was conceiving the film, it was the last scene when I hit the last scene, I was like, oh, I got to make this movie. But the other scene that I really love in the film was when, and I'll just speak generically to not spoil anything, but when the guy's putting together the gun at the table, and as I still remember just writing, and I was just delighted by, as I was writing this scene, because I was like, this is going to be so good. And that's one when I would visit theaters when the film was playing, I just loved stepping into the theater and watching people watch that scene and watching. I mean, it's a real thrill for a filmmaker when you see the effect that your film's having on an audience, whether they're laughing or crying. And in that case, when I actually saw people on the edge of their seats, it was like, not just, metaphorically speaking, but they were actually on the edge of their seats. And I was, as a filmmaker, I'm just like, yes. So anyway, I love the film.
So you've got a sheriff. Was it a sheriff or chief of police?
It was a sheriff.
A sheriff who is also the bishop,
right,
in the town. So he has to fulfill both those roles, and it deals with how you struggle with that line, which members are only too anxious to cross, and all those things. But at the end of it, there's this scene, and let me just be frank with you. I remembered some things about the movie, but the one that really stuck with me was the final scene in the Sacrament meeting, where the sheriff, as the bishop, is sitting up there in front of the congregation, and the sacrament is passed. Right. And there are no words. And of course, in a Mormon sacrament meeting, there would not be a lot of talking, right? But as I watched this, I started looking at my watch and being amazed at the amount of time that's going on in this scene. And I didn't clock it exactly, but I wondered if this were perhaps the longest scene with no dialogue in the history of talking movies, other than Mel Brooks' silent movie, perhaps.
Right. Oh yeah, true. He beat me. Yeah. Probably early Chaplin, because he didn't want to, he didn't want to do it either. So
he was a purist.
Yeah.
Oh, he did pretty good with it. But you did fantastic. I mean, it was just amazing. And I know that I've talked to other people, and that was what they remembered. And and this other person who's a friend of mine who watched it again, she said she cried the first time she saw it, and she watched it again. She cried again.
Yeah, well, I cried.
And you had one of my heroes, Wilford Brimley, in the movie.
Oh, cool.
Quaker Oats oatmeal. It's not just good for you, but it's the right thing to do.
Yeah. How did you manage that anyway, Richard? Getting Wilford Brimley. That was quite the coup.
Oh, I just paid him.
Oh, I was expecting some kind of spiritual story.
Actors and prostitutes, you just pay them. But there's a story. I'll give you a little bit of trivia there, which is I got a good laugh out of you.
No. I'm denying any laughter.
So just a little bit of trivia is I actually wanted William Hurt, the actor, to play the sheriff, and I was going to play the deputy. And then I was trying to get Andy Griffith to play the old guy. And but then Andy Griffith responded that his health was just not good and he couldn't do it. And then I tried to get Richard Farnsworth. I don't remember if you remember him. He was a great older actor. And
yes, actually. And Man from Snowy River.
Yeah. And so he couldn't do it either because of his health. And then he actually died before we actually started shooting the film. But the way it broke down with the amount of money that I had, I couldn't afford William Hurt. So it was just like 2 weeks before I was going to start shooting. I couldn't get William Hurt. So it was like, well, I guess I'm playing the sheriff. So who's going to play the deputy? And then I thought, the main guy from God's Army, he'll be fantastic. So I hired him. So that's how it all shook down. And Wilford was just, I'd loved him and stuff. And I thought, he'd be perfect. And I was able to, offer him the magic number, and he took the role.
He really was absolutely fantastic. It looks like I'm being reminded by members of the audience that Castaway with Tom Hanks probably had a lot of long silent parts in it too.
Oh, good point. Very good. Oh,
we have a sharp audience, I'll tell you that.
I got to tell you a little after story though. You're going to love this. Yeah. So Brimley, you just assume that when you send an offer to an actor through his agent, and then they always say, well, send us the script. You send the script, and then you get an answer back, whether they try to negotiate or whatever. A little bit of negotiation, but then, Wilford said, okay, I'll do it. And so he shows up the first day. I do the obligatory, go see him in his trailer, meet him, talk to him, get to know him. Just very genial conversation. There's a whole story. We don't have time to go into the whole, Wilford Brimley on the set of Brigham City stories, but it was epic. But after he's he gets his scenes for the day. It's like, okay, he's going to do these scenes. And then he comes out of his trailer, after we've had our discussion, I go off, I'm starting to get ready to shoot the scene. Suddenly he comes out of his trailer and I don't know if I can't use the language that he used, but
you could say a word that rhymes.
The dod damn. Okay. He came out and he said, "Is this a dod damn Mormon movie?" He hadn't even read the script. He hadn't even read the script of the movie that he had agreed to be in. And so the rest of the time he was there, he was just cantankerous. And he and I just, we never had Thanksgiving dinner together after that. So, but he was brilliant in that part. He really, we had our issues as far as actor and director go. But as I said, when he passed away, it was like, I'll always be grateful that he played that part because he nailed it. He just did a great job.
I think he did too. Is that what caused you to rewrite the script so he met an early demise?
Oh my gosh. We're going to have to do a show. We're going to have to do a show that's about Wilford Brimley.
Just Wilford Brimley.
But when he, and I don't want to give the spoilers away anyway, but what'd you say? He has a death scene. And again, he still didn't read the script. So he didn't read his death scene until the day that he was supposed to die. And then he's angry with me because he's telling me that he would not, that he would not die. He would not die this way. And, nobody could sneak up on him and blah, blah, blah. And so I just finally had to say, no, Wilford, you're right. Nobody could sneak up on you, but the character that you're playing, he can sneak up on him. And it was just a struggle the whole way. But that's not what we're here to talk about. So let's get moving. Anyway, it's fun. We should do it someday. Maybe if someone will do a movie about the making of that movie, because that was entertaining stuff.
Can I surprise you with a question I haven't asked you before?
Sure.
It does strike me about the sheriff, the character that you play, and his unwillingness to accept that there may be a dangerous element in his town.
Right.
And he says there's never been a murder here.
Right.
And not only does he do the big thing that we know about involving a background check and failing to do it,
right,
but also I started seeing that this character's tunnel vision made it so the character could not recognize the fact that the two girls who, before the movie starts, we find out about them in retrospect, people talking about them, that there's been one girl who had I don't know, maybe suspicious fall from a mountain while she's hiking.
Right.
Or maybe not suspicious. Who knows? People do fall while they're hiking. And then another girl who has disappeared, and the story circulated that she ran off to California and away from her family. She's never made contact, not even a postcard, right? And the FBI agent points that out to your character later on. How suspicious it is. She can see that this is suspicious, and it's definitely a sign of foul play for someone to disappear completely like that. But your character refuses to believe that, at least at the inception, in favor of there's never been a murder here. And it struck me that in some ways, that may be what, all human beings do. We're going to fit things, we're going to ignore the things that contradict our theories of the way things should be, or maybe challenge our comfort zone. Right. But it did also strike me that maybe this has some special application to members of the church, that things happen that they know about, but they're going to interpret them in a safe way, so it doesn't challenge their preconceptions and challenge their feelings of safety. What do you think of that?
And bury their heads in the sand and stuff. It's like, yeah, very much so. It was later, after when I was editing my film Falling, that I realized what, a common theme that runs through almost all of my work, and that is, I didn't really realize it until several films in, but I realized that almost everything all the serious work that I do really focuses on, it's kind of an examination or a meditation on this loss of innocence, that we all experience. To me, for whatever reason, it's just been, it's something that really affects me. And so I did a thing. There's a scene in Brigham City, which is, I'm going to analyze my own films here for a second. But the reason that stuck out for me was when I was editing my film Falling, there was a scene that I was having some trouble figuring out how I was going to, wrap up the ending. It wasn't quite working. And as I was just zipping through the movie, I noticed this scene where in Falling, there's a little boy in Hollywood Boulevard and Hollywood in that film is a very grimy place, which it really is. And, but he is walking past the scene where somebody has jumped off of a building, committed suicide, and a reporter grabs him and pulls him up to the police line so that he can see the body and that they can get his shocked expression on camera. And it's a heartbreaking scene. But as I was looking at that scene in Falling, I realized in Brigham City, I had almost the exact same shot where instead of a little boy, it was a little girl, and it was at the gazebo, and she's there and she's watching as they're pulling one of the murder victims out from under the gazebo. And it's the same thing where it's this little kid looking at what was going on in the adult world. And when I saw that and I made that connection, I was like, why did I do this same thing in two different movies? And suddenly it hit me, and then it started to fall into place. And not only did it help illuminate for me some of what all of my previous films had been about, but it helped me finish Falling, because I then realized, oh, this is what this movie is about. And so I just dove in and was able to finish that. So it's something that concerns me. And in Brigham City, it's really, instead of just that little girl, it's the whole community is having a loss of innocence. And if you notice, even in the Sunday school lesson that's given, they in the movie, the woman's talking about Adam and Eve and just talking about that loss of innocence, and even going so far as they talk a little bit about gullibility and being wise as serpents and harmless as doves, which is a biblical phrase that I love. And so
you see, I saw the movie recently. I saw that scene. I did not even put that together. And this is one of the things that makes your movie so valuable and above the average kind of movie, which is where you deal with these, the human condition and eternal themes that resonate. And so I can continue to see things in it as I watch it. And the more I watch it, the more I see. And then I miss this. And I'm just very, very impressed by all the work that you put into your movies. And I think it was just earlier today, I thought, for all the work that you or anyone, but let's just talk about you, put into a movie, for me just to watch it when it came out 20 years ago, and that be it, seems like shortchanging it on my end.
Well, that's a great compliment. Thanks. I mean, to me, it's an honor that people are still watching it, because it's, those three movies that we're talking about today, States of Grace and Brigham City and God's Army, they're all on Amazon, or at least they're available on Amazon. And, so I see that, people are watching them now, and that means a lot to me. Again, it's like when we talked about my very first film, how, I made a film but I knew that it was trivial. I knew that it was, it was disposable. And these three films aren't, and I know that they're still touching people. I still get, messages from people that just barely now discover the films after all this time, and they're moved by them. A lot of times it's ex-Mormons who watch them and say, they get confused because it's like, I almost want to be Mormon again. And but just talking about and then for the movie that I'm doing now, the script, I just had a writer friend. I always like to share my scripts with my very trusted writers who can give good feedback. And the movie he's a Mormon. The movie just angered him. he's never been angry at me before, but he was angry, and he was saying this movie should never be made, and he was going, and then the next day I got a text from him apologizing and saying, despite my reaction, that movie made me think more about my life and my time as a missionary than I ever have. And he says, I want to talk once I've been able to process this. And so so that's the kind of work I want to do.
Wow.
I want to make films that, John Cassavetes is a great independent. He's one of the fathers of American independent filmmaking. He said something about, he goes, if I made a movie like Empire Strikes Back, I think he was using as the example, he said, I'd be embarrassed. He said, I'd be ashamed. I don't quite feel that extreme about it, but I'm quite fond of that movie. But anyway, he was saying, he didn't want to make popular movies. He says, I want to make a movie that, people are going to walk out of, people are going to hate, but it's never going to leave them because, they're going to hate it so much. They're not going to be able to let go. They'll be vacuuming their floors 5 years later, thinking about that movie. He goes, I would rather have that than make something that's just disposable. And I totally understand that. It's like the way I look at it now is, I'm not a young man anymore. I've only got, how many more films am I going to get to make? And how much more impact am I going to be able to have on our culture, on my own children, on the world that my children are going to live in? And, I don't want to do any more Girl Crazies or Evil Angels or Boys at the Bar. I want to do things that, if they're the last film I make, it'll be worth it,
Yeah, it seems like Steven Spielberg came to that point in his career as well. Just looking back on his movies. But regardless of that, I'm sorry, we've got to go into now States of Grace as time is slipping away, but I do want to cover this definitely, and then we'll get to
I warned you that I can talk. I warned you that I can. You get me talking about movies, and I can go on. So, all right, States of Grace, let's do it.
Yes, because I'm watching States of Grace. Now, I had watched it before, right? So I watched God's Army, and then I watched States of Grace a number of years later, 5-6 years later. And I see that it's about missionaries, right? But I never make any connection between the first movie and the second movie. Now, when I watch it, it's called States of Grace, not God's Army 2. Right. That's when I watched it on a DVD, I'm sure. And when I'm watching it now, just a couple days after watching God's Army, I'm aware, because I watched them. I watched in the order we're discussing them. I'd watched Brigham City, and I saw that you had brought on some actors that you had used in God's Army to play different roles. There were at least 2 of them. Well, 3 if we count you. And so I knew that was something that you did. You had certain actors that you would go back to. And then I see some of those actors in this movie again. The first one was the mission president.
Elder Dalton, my character didn't return because,
Right. There was that problem.
He was gone. Yeah.
Yes. He was gone.
Yeah.
I'm watching this, and it's the mission president, right? And I think I said out loud, they got the same guy to play the mission president here, because I remembered him. And then I see this blonde-haired guy who is the practical joker in the first one. He's kind of doing the same thing. And I thought, they got that guy back too. And then finally they got, the black missionary, the one you said about Carthage. And then I said, they got this same guy back too. He's a missionary too. And then he introduces himself in the movie to somebody else and says, I'm Elder Banks. And I said, no, wait a second. This is the same character. These are all the same people. This is the same mission. This must be after, and not long after, because it has to be within 2 years because that's how long a mission is, of the events in God's Army. And all of a sudden I went, oh my gosh, this is just, okay, these are the same people. And I finally figured it out. But it did raise the question for me. Why is it that you went back to this same well of missionaries and telling their stories? What was it that you felt you had not said in God's Army that you felt still needed to be said in States of Grace?
Oh boy, that's a great question, because I never thought I'd make a sequel, and it was nothing. I don't have anything necessarily against them. I just feel like usually they're just a cash grab. It's just capitalizing on something. And again, I don't have any problem with that. But I just thought, God's Army, a standalone thing. But as I was moving from Burbank to Mapleton, which is where we were moving, right, that was probably 4 months before God's Army was to open, I just knew that I was going to be in Utah at least, pretty much full time for 6 months. So I just wanted to be with my family. So we all just moved up here, right? So in the U-Haul on the way, my wife and kids were in the car. I was driving the U-Haul, and as I was driving to entertain myself, keep my mind busy and productive, and it's something that, by the way, if you ever need a movie idea, get in your car and drive across the country and don't listen to the radio, just think. And some of my best ideas have come driving. I love it. So, but on the way, I just started to play with that idea. It's like I knew, I was so confident that God's Army was going to work. And I thought, well, if I did do a sequel, what would it be? And so I just started playing around with ideas. And of course, I wasn't, I was just trying to be open to, again, I still had I had that philosophy of not wanting to do anything trivial. It's like, if I'm going to do it, I want it to be, I want it to be better. I want it to be Godfather 2 to Godfather, not just your average sequel, because there aren't very many sequels that are better than the original.
Let me throw in right here now that I do think you managed to accomplish that rarity of having a sequel that was better than the original.
Oh, thanks. As I was driving, though, I had these ideas, these dual ideas of these two missionaries. One was the moment when I thought I almost, I always have, when I'm playing around with an idea for a movie, there are things that are like, that's really good. It's something that I love to play with. But there's usually one moment in a film when I realize I got to do it, and for me, like I said, with Brigham City, it was the last scene. And as I was toying around with this idea, I had the idea of the missionary, the Latino missionary, just pulling his shirt over, after a drive-by shooting, and to stop the blood, he pulls his shirt off, and you see tattoos on his back. And I was like, that's a great moment. That's a great cinematic moment. And so it's like, okay, I'm 50% there, but I don't have a movie yet. And then I started playing around then I started to think about his companion. And I also wanted to do a thing where in a movie where I'd have a character that you think is the main character and a character that you think is a supporting character. And then by the end of the movie, they just kind of switch places. So the guy that you kind of dismiss and just think he's the sidekick, suddenly he becomes a huge character. He almost goes from being funny to tragic. And then the guy that you thought was the story was about, he kind of at the end takes kind of a secondary role. And that was important to me to play around with that. But when there was something that had always bugged me that I hated, that I thought was repulsive in Mormon thought, something I heard a lot as a missionary, and I hated it. And it was the quote that from a former general authority that had said, talking about missionaries and going out in the field and saying, it's better to come home in a casket than to come home dishonored. And I thought that was just a violation of the doctrine that we supposedly believed in of Jesus' atonement. And then, I knew from my own studies in Mormon history, the quote that referred to blood atonement, where, the early Brigham Young, talked about some sins are so serious that even the blood of Christ can't pay for them. So people had to pay for them themselves. And I just, well, I'll hold on to that thought for later, but cool. When I thought of that and I realized I want to have a Mormon missionary character who makes a major mistake, and that quote comes home for the audience. It's like the real life significance or the real life effects of thinking like that come home. I really want to do that. That's when I knew that I had a movie.
Matter of play this RFM?
Yeah, almost, because okay. I was baptized in 1978. This is part of the LDS culture that I imbibed. It was said by leaders of the church, so I accepted it. It was extreme, but maybe the dramatic nature of it is what made it so attractive to be so repeated among members of the church, so that virtually everybody knew it. It had a lot of currency. I'm not sure about today, but I went back, did a little bit of research. I knew when you mentioned it to me, or when I saw it on the movie, that this was Marion G. Romney. This was his story that he had told. I went back, I found in 1981, there was an Ensign First Presidency message written by Marion G. Romney in which this story was told. Went back a little bit further, 1979 April General Conference, which would be the second General Conference since the time I was baptized, when he told this story. And he's addressing, I'm pretty sure this is General Conference priesthood session, where he specifically addresses his comments to the youth, i.e. those who are going to be going on missions, because he wants them to understand this. And we have that clip just in case there's anybody who thinks that we're making this up out there.
And that the Spirit of God dwelleth in you. If any man defile the temple of God, him shall God destroy. Some years ago, the First Presidency said to the youth of the church, better dead clean than alive unclean. I remember how my father impressed the seriousness of unchastity upon my mind. He and I were standing in the railroad station in Rexburg, Idaho, in the early morning of November the 12th, 1920. We heard the train whistle and knew that in 3 minutes I would be on my way to Australia to fill a mission. In that short interval, my father said to me, among other things, my son, you are going a long way from home, but your mother and I, your brother and sisters, will be with you constantly in our thoughts and prayers. We shall rejoice with you in your successes, and we shall sorrow with you in your disappointments. When you are released and return, we shall be glad to greet you and welcome you back into the family circle. But remember this, my son, we would rather come to this station and take your body off the train in a casket than to have you come home unclean, having lost your virtue.
Boom, there it is.
I'll tell you, I watched this movie as well. And at first I couldn't find it. I was looking for God's Army 2 and I couldn't find it anywhere. You had changed the title on it. And when I watched it, I was in the midst of beginning to really have questions about the church. And I knew the Romney quote, and I knew how the movie played out. And it really struck me. You did a powerful job of seeing how, excuse my French, but bullshit theology can cause real harm when the rubber meets the road. And I thought you did a fantastic job of helping the audience see what bad theology can do. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and there's something else that very few people know about the timeline of this, where I actually shot this film in States of Grace. I shot it in 2004. So it was really 5 years after I had shot God's Army. And so I had made Brigham City. And then there was a few years when I was trying to get a Joseph Smith film made, and that's a whole other show. So in the timeline in my own spiritual life, it was only maybe 4 or 5 months before I made God's Army 2, States of Grace, that I'd had a very profound spiritual experience that I went into great depth on Mormon stories, some interviews several years ago. If anybody's interested in that, we don't have time to go into it now, but I talk about the moment where I realized that, and I feel like in a direct answer to prayer, God told me that Mormonism was not real. And so I went from 30 seconds before being a true, full passionate believer to 30 seconds later, realizing that everything I knew about God and the universe and my place in it, and that it was wrong. And it was a traumatic experience. Most mainstream Christians don't understand, what that kind of what leaving Mormonism is like. And so for me, it was a long and painful process, even just to the point where I was able to tell my wife what had happened and how I felt. But when I made States of Grace, it was like I knew that Mormonism wasn't real and it wasn't true. And I knew that I was leaving. I wasn't ready to be public about it yet because I was still processing this experience that I'd had. but I knew that I really only had one more chance to say anything to the Mormon people, from inside the community, because I knew eventually I'd have to, come out publicly and say that I was not a believer anymore. And so this was a very, but I did it in a very, to me, it was so important. And again, I was trying to process the changes that were happening for me, but it was a very loving goodbye that they didn't know it was a goodbye, but it was, but to me, it was like, what can I say? And I went into it with that attitude, was like, I really want to say a few things that are really, really important. And this was one of them, bringing up this, the bad theology, this particular, piece of bad theology. But then also for me, it was very important to, something that had always bothered me in Mormonism. My early family, my mother married a Mormon guy when I was 7. That's how I was adopted into Mormonism, and I took to it. But my grandparents on both sides, one was Baptist and one was Pentecostal, and so I had grown up, going mostly to a Pentecostal church, and I knew Christianity from that standpoint, and so it had always bothered me the way Mormons are with crosses, and so if anybody's seen States of Grace recently, you'll see how I tried to reintroduce the cross in a way, kind of take some of the stank off of it, I guess is a horrible way to say it. But to me, I was always thinking it was like, if you're a Mormon, back in my time as a Mormon, it was almost like we were vampires, It was like whenever a cross would come up, there was just this, this revulsion to it. And I really wanted to say, this is a beautiful symbol, and it means so much to so many people, and it should mean so much to us if we really believe what we say we believe. And so I wanted to just kind of leave it as a little gift in the culture, try to make a little bit of a change in the attitude towards the cross, which is how I, worked it into the film. So,
yeah, and I thought that was beautifully done. By the way, Mormons are the true vampires. Anyway, okay, so we're going to get to your project, but would you please just take a couple minutes and tell us about the confusion that I have? I think what Bill just suggested, the confusion he had on the title of this movie. It was God's Army 2, or is it States of Grace, and why, and what happened there?
Well, originally it was just going to be God's Army 2, States of Grace. I was a little removed. What had happened was, as I just briefly mentioned, I'd made God's Army, I'd made Brigham City. And by that time, all these other Mormon filmmakers had decided, oh my gosh, look, there's a market, which was funny because I was going all around everywhere telling them, finally, there's a market for our stories. Now we can finally tell our stories. And I try to talk about telling, the stories about examining our faith and our history and telling our stories the way that only we can. Unfortunately, all they ever heard was there's a market. So rush to the market, and people that had no business making films at all, and had nothing to say of value, just started flooding the market with caca, and I spoke about that. I made a lot of enemies in the Mormon film world, which didn't exist before then. But because I would call, especially crap like Singles Ward and stuff like that, I would call it out. And,
hey, I thought The Home Teachers was really good.
Oh my gosh, I have to get off the show.
I was kidding about that, by the way.
But I was so furious. I mean, I was like, like I said at the beginning, I was consciously trying to create Mormon cinema, and I wanted it to be, I was very naive, idealistic. I was wanting it to be, I thought this is going to be intelligent, and it's going to be powerful. And I would tell people all the time, it's like, whenever anyone thinks of powerful, beautiful, deep spiritual movies about God, they're going to look to the Mormon community. Man, I was wrong.
Yeah, you're like Dr. Frankenstein there.
I really believed it. I was passionate. And then I started to see this crap come out. And it was, to me, it was as insulting as, one of my inspirations as an independent filmmaker was Spike Lee. I was young when he first started making his films. And so, he was a hero of mine. It's like, here's a guy that didn't like the way his people were being depicted, And so he made a change, and he made a super cheap movie and had a huge impact. And all black filmmakers after him, really owe him a great debt, and should be incredibly grateful to him. But he would talk about, and I felt it the same way. It's like these Mormon films that they came out with. It was like, I felt like it was the equivalent of black people making their own minstrel shows. It was like, why would we do that? Why, when we've got so much, so much rich history and so much doctrine to explore, and so much, it's, the struggles of having faith in the real world. There's so much meat there. Why are you guys screwing around with this stuff, making fun of us? It's why are you making, it was just, anyway, to me, I was like, the metaphors I would always use, it was like, the cute one would say, I was having a pool party and I invited all of you to come to my pool party, and now you're just pooping and peeing in my pool. And it really irritates me. That was the cute way. But the other way that I would say it was, Mormon cinema is my baby, and it's still a baby, and you guys are strangling it in its crib. And I feel like that's what they did.
How did that impact States of Grace? It
impacted it because by the time like I say, after Brigham City, I was trying to make this Joseph Smith film that kept me busy for a few years. And when I finally realized, okay, I got to get a movie out and make States of Grace. And so I went back to that idea that I had. It's like, oh yeah, the idea that I'd had from even before the release of God's Army, and I made it. But I didn't understand what had happened in the community, in the Mormon community, in the time between Brigham City in 2001 and States of Grace in the later part of Thanksgiving of 2005, because I didn't realize it, but they had polluted the market so much that Mormons themselves didn't want to go see Mormon movies anymore. And the most illuminating experience I had with this was I couldn't make the movie work. I put it out at God's Army 2, and nobody would go see it. And it was getting great reviews, and I couldn't understand it. This was a sequel to a very successful movie that had only been a few years ago, had a huge impact, and yet people just wouldn't go. And so I pulled it, remarketed it, put it out again, still didn't work. And I ran into Robert Kirby, who was a writer for the Salt Lake Tribune. And he, great guy, he had written about God's Army in Brigham City, glowing reviews in the Tribune. And I just bumped into him at the Salt Lake City Library one day. And I said, hey, did you go see States of Grace? And he got this weird look on his face, and he goes, no, I didn't. And he said it in a way that was like, okay, now I got to ask. It's like, okay, why didn't you go? And he said, it doesn't make any sense. He says, I've seen your other films. I loved them. And yet when I saw that God's Army 2 was coming out, I thought, it's just another crappy Mormon movie. And that's when I realized that if one of my biggest supporters couldn't separate, until he really thought about it, couldn't separate my work from that work, I knew it was doomed. And it was, at that point, the reputation of Mormon film was soiled, and wasn't really anything I could do about it. So that's what, and at that point, it was like, I still want people to see this film. People were associating God's Army, the original one, with this crap that the other guys were doing. And so to them, singles ward, home teachers, and God's Army, they were all the same thing, which they are very much not the same thing. And so at that point, I just decided, no, I'm just going to let it be States of Grace. And maybe, non-Mormons, those that aren't, really bigoted against Mormons, maybe they'll embrace it. I don't know. So that's why the title change.
Right. But then did you find that non-Mormon Christians were excited about seeing a movie about Mormon missionaries?
No. Well, that was as soon as I realized, it's like, okay, this isn't, I'm not going to pull the Mormons in to see this film. I started thinking, I'm going to market this to Christians, and I already knew that I was leaving Mormonism. So it was like, this will be a fun experience. So we'd go to Vegas and Phoenix and everywhere, and we'd do these screenings in Salt Lake and try to invite the ministers from the Christian communities to come watch the film. And it was like pulling teeth to get anybody there. Once they saw it, they loved it. They'd come out saying, "Oh, this is great." They wanted their congregations to see it. They wanted to share that they really liked the movie, but they couldn't get their people to see it because, again, you get 15 minutes into the movie and it's just two Mormon missionaries, and there's no, the movie's not saying they're bad people or that they're doing anything wrong. And so the Christians are just like, yeah, we don't want to watch this. If those who stuck with it really appreciated the film. And I did have a very small, very, very small Christian fan base for the film, but it's really hard because there's such a knee-jerk bias against Mormon missionaries, understandable for the average American Christian. So they don't want to, they're very cautious about anything with Mormons in it.
Well, that covers the 3 movies. We have one left. We've got about 20 minutes till the top of the hour, and I want to reserve that for talking about your upcoming project. Tell us about it. And this one's based on a true story, correct?
Yeah.
But it still has Mormon missionaries.
All right, well, get this. So I thought after Falling, I was like, I don't want, and by the way, Falling is the best Mormon film ever made. It's the best. It's an R-rated Mormon film.
Where can we see it?
My best film. You can't see it. It's mine. You can't watch it. I think next year I'm actually going to put it out and make it widely available, so you'll be able to watch it then. But it is, I feel like it's my best film, and I feel like it's, and it has to do with a lapsed Mormon character. Anyway, so it's the best film that nobody can see, and best film I've made that nobody can watch.
It makes it hard to contradict.
Yeah, exactly. Trying to build a mystique about it, right? So anyway, so I thought I'm never going to have I don't want to do any more movies that have anything to do with Mormonism. It's time for me to move on artistically, creatively, spiritually. Pro or con, I just don't want anything to do with it. And that was that was pretty much where I was. And so I guess I'll be super transparent here and honest, but that moment I told you about where girl crazy, when I was at the cocaine guy's office and he was wanting me to put nudity, and I was just thinking, where am I? What am I doing? And I was willing to give it all up. Well, I came to that a few years ago, same kind of point where after Falling and the other films, and I was so disillusioned I was just heartbroken when Mormonism turned out not to be real. It was, to me, it was devastating. And I just kind of stumbled around for several years, trying to just find, be happy somehow, just keep moving, keep putting one foot in front of another. I still have my faith in God. Like I've never lost my belief in God and my faith in God. And I still loved, Jesus and his teachings, but Mormonism had done such a number on me that I didn't trust anything. It's like I didn't trust the idea that someone belonging to another church of any kind. I was just no. It was, I wanted nothing to do with it, nothing to do with religion, institutional religion at all. And I happened to have been befriended by this strange Christian pastor who recognized me in a Carl's Jr. one day, despite the fact that at the time I was like huge, in my depressing, nihilistic unhappiness, I was like smoking cigars, drinking beer, and gained like 100 pounds. I was a huge dude. So I don't know.
1977 Elvis.
There you go. Yeah, I was Elvis. Not as charismatic, but yeah, same principle. And anyway, this guy says, "You're Richard Dutcher," and I said, "No, I'm not." And he goes, "Yes, you are." And I was like, "No, I'm not. I just didn't want to talk to anybody." It's like I don't. And then finally, he kept at it. So I was like, "Yeah, okay, yeah, I'm." And then he said, "Hey, I've seen your movies," and he says he talked about being a pastor, and I'm looking at him. He's this huge guy, and he's got tattoos all over and long hair and a big beard, and looks like he's like the king of the Hell's Angels, you know. And I was so intrigued by this guy that he said, "Hey, you want to have lunch sometime?" So I was like, "All right." I gave him my number. We met up for lunch, and I just liked this human so much that I really wanted to support whatever he was doing. So I went to his, you know, church service, and that was a real change, it felt like home to me. It was the strangest thing. It was like it was home, and there's a whole experience there that we can't talk through that. We don't have time. But I was in a very regenerative place, and I've always been a prayerful person, although in that period I didn't have any faith that anybody was really hearing me or listening to me or that it made any difference. But I got to that same place where I was before, where I was just like, you know, on my knees telling God that I didn't care what, I just want to know what he wanted me to do. You know, it's like I tried all the other stuff. I wasn't happy. I didn't want anything to do with it. And I just wanted to do what he wanted me to do, whether it was like give up filmmaking for good, go do anything else. And I just said, you know, but I'm kind of dumb, and you just got to let me know for sure. If you're going to talk to me, you got to let me know that I hear it loud and clear, right? Like he had done, telling me that Mormonism wasn't true. So not long after that, I'd had a friend at church, at the little church that I was going to, and he kept wanting me to watch this 17-minute video. He said, "Oh, I saw this YouTube video. This is a guy, he was a Mormon missionary, and he became a born-again Christian while he was a missionary. You got to watch it." And, you know, I was being polite to him, but inside my eyes were rolling back to the back of my head. And I was just thinking, I don't want to watch some stupid YouTube video about some stupid Mormon kid, you know, becoming a stupid born-again Christian. I was just not having it, you know. And but he kept at it. You know, every time I'd see him, he'd bring this up. So finally, one Saturday night, I was like, all right, I'm going to see Danny tomorrow. He's going to ask me. So I'm just going to watch this damn video, get it over with. And so I pull it up, and it's this guy named Micah Wilder. And it's a little clip from one of his, he has a little music ministry, and they go around telling their stories. But he tells the story about how he was an LDS missionary in Florida. And he tells the story of his born again experience and his transformation into a Christian and leaving Mormonism, and how that, of course, you know, led to a big conflict with his LDS leaders and the end of his mission. Anyway, halfway through this video, it was just so clear to me that this was the story, that this was it. This is my movie, the next movie I'm making about this guy. And but there was, in my mind, I was like, really? I mean, in my mind, that was what I was thinking. It's like, really? This? I don't want to do this. But, you know, I had asked, so I reached out to him, and you know, I said, hey, your stories, you know, I don't know if you know who I am, but I made some films about Mormonism, and he knew who I was. He had seen the films, and he had actually mentioned to a guy like 8 or 9 years before, one of his best friends, when he said, hey, I think, you know, he was working on a manuscript for a book, and he said, I think this could make a good movie. And he said, I think if anybody ever makes it into a movie, I want it to be Richard Dutcher. And he didn't know me. I didn't know him, but he knew that he knew States of Grace. He knew God's Army, and he knew that I knew what Mormonism was, and that I knew what leaving the church was. And so anyway, that's my film. Yeah. So that's the one that I went out. I actually moved to Florida. People didn't understand why I moved to Florida. That was why. It was like I wanted to really know him. I wanted to know the people that were involved in this story and interview all of them. I wanted to. He started a music ministry with his wife, and that's what they do. And they run a little hotel in a bed and breakfast near Orlando, Florida. And so I actually just went and started living there and working with them, working on the script while he was working on his manuscript for his book, which just came out last year. It's called Passport to Heaven. The movie's not called Passport to Heaven, but the book is called Passport to Heaven. In fact, I think I have a copy. I do have a copy. So there's a copy, Passport to Heaven.
And that's a picture of the elder on it, Elder Wilder?
Yeah. Michael Wilder. Yeah, so that's him as a missionary in Florida. But the movie's actually, I mean, it's based on the story And the movie's somewhat different because, like I say, as he was finishing the manuscript, I was writing the script. And so I was not only using the pages that he was giving me, but I was also interviewing all the people that were involved in the story, so that I could kind of, tell the story in a really cinematic way. And oddly, in the weird times that we lived, just when I was feeling like, okay, the script's pretty good, it's time to go out and start raising money, that's when COVID hit and kind of shut things down. But it's been a blessing because I was able to spend a couple of years just really tightening the script and really improving it and focusing on it. So now that's actually why I'm in Salt Lake right now, is I'm just out on the road meeting with people, trying to raise money to get this movie going, which is it's a huge part of the filmmaking process. People don't realize that. And so, by the way, Bill, are you a millionaire? Do you want to invest in a movie? So.
I'm about the furthest thing from a millionaire. But yeah, I'd love to throw a few bucks that way. I'd love to know how can they support the film?
Oh,
yes. And while you're talking about it, what is the title, and can we get the promo poster up on the screen?
There we go. Yeah, this is not this is a concept poster. So this is probably not what the final poster is going to be, but this was my concept to try to get the idea of what I'm doing. It shows, kind of gives you the idea of what the film's about. The true story of a Mormon missionary's journey to Christ. And I was joking around. I've been joking around that when I do put it out, maybe I'm going to just get, when I released Falling in Utah, I got a billboard that said the first R-rated Mormon movie, just to irritate people mostly. But this one, I'm thinking about doing a bunch of billboards that'll say God's Army 3, Jesus is enough.
Oh, by the way, I don't know if you believe in synchronicity. I mean, you are a Christian now, correct? So maybe you just believe in God's intervening every now and again in our lives.
Sure.
Where was it you met this preacher again?
Where did I meet him?
Yes. What was the name of the restaurant?
Oh, it's Carl's Jr.
And Richard, who is Carl?
Who is Carl? He's the main character of Sling Blade.
Well, he's also a main character in States of Grace.
Oh, there you go. Good catch.
Thank you.
Interesting.
I got 1 million of them.
Wow. Good job. Good job.
So if anybody wants to know what that is about and hasn't seen States of Grace, hopefully you will do so. It's certainly worth the watch. Now, if we can close out before we go to phone calls, and you can just tell people how it is that they could contribute / support this movie.
Yeah, no, thank you. One of the difficulties I have as a filmmaker is legitimate raising money. It's like I'm out trying to raise very large amounts of money. This is not really a low budget movie. And because of the securities and exchange laws, there's only so much I can do publicly to talk about it. But one of the things I can say is that I'm restricted from spending any of the money that I raise until, we reach a $3 million benchmark. So in the meantime, I've got to rely on, my own funds or, friends who are either loaning or donating money to the cause to keep me going, keep me on the road, keep me meeting with people, so that I can raise the necessary funds to make the film. So here's on this sheet here, you can see one of the ways that we can do that is if people donate to the movie through the Adams Road Ministry. Adams Road Ministry is the ministry that Micah Wilder, who wrote the book and whose story this is, it's his ministry and his groups. They have a ministry, and so you can donate here. You can go to their website, adamsroadministry.com, scroll down to the bottom and donate. And if you say, that it's for the movie, there's a little space where you can add a note. If you say it's for the movie, for Jesus is Enough movie, then those funds can go, not only can the people get, a tax deductible credit for their taxes because it's through a 501c3, a nonprofit organization. So the donors can get a write-off, but then the ministry can legitimately, use that money to help get the movie made. So that's what we're doing. And yes, I would greatly appreciate any support, not only, through donations, but if anyone would like to participate in a larger way, please get in touch with me and let me know. I'd be happy to meet with people and talk more specifically about all the details of larger investments or loans and that kind of situation. So
How would they get in touch with you?
they would get in touch with me through my email, which is richard@edgewaterfilm.com. Edgewater Film is the name of the film company, the Edgewater Film Company. So richard@edgewaterfilm.com. You can reach me through there.
Fantastic.
And then also, if somebody, if somebody's interested in watching States of Grace or God's Army or Brigham City, you don't have Amazon or you'd rather just have a hard copy, like a DVD. If anybody still does that, you can go to richarddutcher.com and order one through there. So
Fantastic. All right. Are you up for some phone calls?
yeah, yep, let's do it.
All right. Do we have any? I think Bill is talking to somebody
Yeah,
right now.
we've got two of them. So let's pull off. This is Marco. Let me make sure this is here. Marco, are you there?
Yes, it is me. Hi,
Awesome.
Marco El Polo.
Excellent.
Yes,
Well,
Marco Polo. How you
I'm
doing?
glad you're on, El Polo. So, so what do you got for us? You're on tonight with Mormonism Live, Richard Dutcher.
Yeah. That's just a quick shout out to Radio Free Mormon. Sorry, I messed up the Polo last time. That's on me. So no worries there. Hey, Mr. Dutcher, a pleasure to meet you. I think you might know a Joe Puente. He used to run up like Utah Filmmakers Association or something like that a long time ago. He might still do it.
Yeah.
Anyways, pleasure to meet. Oh, cool. Anyways, so big fan of your work, and I am really proud that you're actually doing another film, because I was thinking to myself, man, it's been a minute since I've heard anything from Mr. Dutcher. So I think it's great that you're doing this, and I definitely want to support you. So quick question. I kind of have this little bug in me, and kind of getting excited to do a kind of a sort of like well, let me ask you a question. Are you familiar, and this might be a stupid question to ask a movie director, but are you familiar with Mystery Science Theater 3000?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, Marco.
So I just have this idea of maybe doing something. Yes, go ahead.
Do you like Servo or Crow best?
Oh God, I think RFM. I would see you as Servo, and so I would say Servo is the best.
Okay, because I like
Crow
Crow.
is a close second. It's hard. It's a toss-up.
Okay, go ahead with your question. Sorry about that.
It's
I
a
just had to know.
toss-up.
Okay.
Yeah. No, this is a great question. No, I was going to ask you, just to get your permission, really, of more than anything else, if it's okay with you, if we did a kind of a lighthearted riff treatment of some of your films and stuff. I actually kind of want to do it. I'm pretty serious about doing it.
Yeah, I'd probably be okay with that. I had recently somebody sent me a link, not recently, I guess it was a couple of years ago. Somebody thinking I would enjoy it sent me a link to a couple of guys. They weren't Mormons, they weren't Christians. They were some guys that did that kind of stuff, but they just basically, they would find a Christian movie and then they would play it and they would roast it, as they were going along. And they had done God's Army, and I didn't find it funny. They were just so mean spirited, and so it was like such jackasses that it was like, I wrote back to this guy and it's like, why did you send me that? That's like, it's like someone sending you 2 hours of someone making fun of your children the whole time. I was like, I don't, if it was done good naturedly and stuff, it's like, sure. If it was affectionately done.
Oh yeah, for sure. And yeah, and that's going to be my next thing in Radio Free Mormon. If you would like to participate in said riff, that would be wonderful. But I'm not going to
participate right now,
Marco, but I think it would be
Marco,
a fun adventure.
Marco, and say, hey, I have toyed with the idea of doing a Mystery Science Theater 3000 General Conference review, but I don't know if it's ever going to work.
Right on. No, Richard, for sure, I would definitely make sure it's in good taste generally, and I would actually want to have you look at them before even posting them anywhere, because I do respect, like I said, I do respect your work in as much as I would just go ahead and do it without your permission. So yeah, appreciate it.
Marco, thank you so much for calling in. It's always great to hear from you.
Yeah, great to hear you too, RFM and Bill. Take care now.
Take it easy.
Bye-bye.
And we've got one other call on the line. This is Roger. Roger, you're on the line. How are you?
I am just great. How are you?
Good. Good to hear your voice.
Thank you. I just want to make a quick comment on these last comments before I start my real comment. And that was that Elder Wilder's, Micah Wilder's mother, Lynn Wilder, wrote a previous book, Unveiling Grace, which I would suggest strongly you read it before you read Passport to Heaven. Even it helps understand how she and the rest of her family left the church when her son converted to Christianity.
Yeah.
Now, also, I would like to bear my testimony about God's Army. God's Army was my mission, and that's why I remember it's been so many years since I saw it that I served in Lincoln Heights area of Los Angeles, California, and that was so accurate. One thing, let's talk about older missionaries. At that time, only one missionary was allowed to go into the field every 6 months because the draft board would not allow more than that many missionaries going in. So their missionaries came back from Vietnam, and then they wanted to serve a mission. So many of the missionaries there were serving from, let's say, 25 to 35 years old when they served at their mission. So that really happened. Also, I want to emphasize that if one thing that it teaches is that if you expect your mission to be perfect, you're going to the wrong place. My first companion there in that area would serve 2 hours, and then he'd come home after he bought some more guitar music and plays guitar. Also, one was accurate is the hookers there in Hollywood. That's exactly where I served. And you had to go around that area if you wanted to stay out of them. Another thing was that what I loved was the cockroach collection in that movie. That if you think you're gonna serve in a U.S. and not have third world conditions, you're in a world of hurt. We had to clean out our apartment. Took us hours and hours, days to get the cockroaches out of it. We couldn't cook in our oven because the cockroaches would fall out of the top of the stove and fall into our food. We had a lowered ceiling, and so every night I had to listen to the mice running across my head and dropping down stuff on my face as I slept. We had to clean our fridge out and eventually got the cockroaches mostly out of it. But it's terrible that if you think that you're going to have a good conditions as a missionary, you've got another thing coming. And we served there in the Hollywood Stake, and to give you a timing of when that happened, Elder LeGrand Richards came to be our stake conference speaker, and the next week, Elder David O. McKay died as president. And I've still got the LDA Times showing the death of President McKay. So my thoughts are, missionary is not a mission is not a bunch of roses, and and I'm sorry about that little boy that she felt that she couldn't bring to your movie, because it might teach him some of the reality of what's actually a mission. That mission there, I had another mission companion that there's a part in the mission discussions, the 6 discussions, that says, if you want, we can help you by taking away your cigarettes and throwing them in the garbage. Well, I came home and found out that my companion was taking them in the garage and smoking the ones that we were taking from our investigators. So you're not going to get perfect companions either. And that's my thoughts.
Thanks, Roger.
Yeah, thanks, Roger. This is the best kept secret in the LDS Church, is that missions are not beds of roses.
Right, right. All right, we've got one more. We had 2 calls, one dropped off, but here's our last call. This is Eric. Eric's on the line. Eric, are you there?
Hey, I am here. I'm almost
Awesome.
disappointed you took my call. I was hoping we could do another 40 minutes about Roger's cockroaches.
Yeah, maybe those are.
Hey, look, we had cockroach issues in a certain apartment in Japan. And the deal with the cockroaches was you come in from tracting at night and it's dark out, right? And there's this main area with the tatami mats where you're going to put your blankets and everything to sleep every night. And you come in, you turn on the light. No. That's what it was. I've been out only a few months. We come in, there's a missionary. Before you turn on the lights, you got to grab the vacuum cleaner. And you have it ready to go. You turn on the lights, and then you start going to work with that vacuum cleaner before all the cockroaches can disappear in the corners. That was the nightly ritual.
Well, I'm sorry I missed out on that. And as much as I'd like to talk about cockroaches, I thought maybe I'd ask about filmmaking.
Please get us back on track.
You know, Richard, I haven't seen a lot of really great depictions of the loss of faith in film. One is the damn them scene in God's Army, which just watching as an ex-Mormon is absolutely heart-wrenching. And the other is was recently Richard Garfield in Under the Banner of Heaven, in the car, as he was, his heart was breaking, realizing that Mormonism wasn't real. I just wondered if you could address what does it take to put on film a realistic and meaningful depiction of the loss of faith.
Yeah, well, it's one of the hardest things to do. It's I've found a lot of times in my spiritual filmmaking career, I find myself often filming something that nobody's done before, or at least nobody's done well before. Usually, if you're making a bank heist movie or a romantic comedy or whatever, there's hundreds of examples of, you can go back and do it like Scorsese did it, or you can go on and on and on. But when I made God's Army, there was, the scene where the elder, one of the hardest scenes to capture on film for that film was where the elder is praying at night by himself in the room, trying to, have some connection with God, trying to have some, experience, trying to have, gain a testimony, as a Latter-day Saint would say. And of course, the actor that I was working with wasn't LDS. And so I was trying to get something out of him that he hadn't experienced, that he was Jewish. He didn't even, he didn't have a relationship with Jesus. So it was even like I was trying to tell him, what these experiences were like. And he was trying to portray it. And I was shooting on film, and I had very little money to make the movie. And we burned through so much film of me he's sitting at this chair, praying, and I'm lying on the floor, like looking up at him just a few feet away, and I'm talking to him, and I'm working. And it took forever until we got something that in fact, I went back and reshot some of that. It's like, I thought, it was like, okay, I've got it. But then when I was editing it, it was like, no, I don't have it. That's not there. So I had to go back and bring the actor back and shoot some more. And then, he was able to portray more of an emotional experience between a father and a son, and that's what connected for him. And I was able to use that in the film. But the same thing in Brigham City, when I didn't get William Hurt, in a way, I was like, to play the sheriff, in a way, I was thinking, well, okay, if I'm going to play him, I knew I was going to be able to get that last scene. It was like, I know exactly what I'm going for. I know exactly what that guy is feeling. I know exactly, I know this. And so that was one of the fastest things I've ever been able to film. We were this chaos with all of these people doing this big chapel scene. And then it was, okay, now the heart of the scene, we got to shoot it. And it was just like, put the camera on me, bam, we did it. And it was easy. It was like, I was able to just go there immediately. And I've had those experiences but it's that thing where you're trying to explore, you're trying to find a way to depict something. Usually it's nonverbal. You're trying to depict something that's very, very internal and very hard to depict. And another reason I'm excited about Jesus Is Enough, the movie that I'm hoping to make as soon as I can pull the money together, is that's a key part, and it's something else that draws me to this story. That moment when the missionary in this film, that moment when it culminates in one night, when it's just him and God and it comes crashing down, I know what that's like. I know exactly what that's like. And I can't wait to be able to, and I've never seen it on film before. I've never seen that on film. And I'm going to swing for the fences. I want people to just be knocked out of their seats, and I want that experience preserved on film. And I agree with you. The Andrew Garfield scene in Under the Banner of Heaven, that was beautifully done, but that's going to look like kindergarten compared to what I'm going to do. So,
What was it like when you were directing the missionary losing his faith in God's army? You were still a believing Latter-day Saint. What was it like for you to go to that place in your mind while you were still faithful?
Well, you know what it was, a story I've not really told, I don't think publicly, but or at least not in a very long time. But the first time, I'd had the experience of knowing I wanted to make movies about Mormons. I knew that there was an audience. I knew that if I did it well, that it would really take off. And then I came to, it's like I'm going to tell my story, but it's really hard to describe to people what it's like to, in the year, in the late 1990s, when I was trying to create something that didn't exist before. It's like I'm trying to create. Mormons had only had the institutional films. That's all we had. We had, Windows of Heaven and Legacy and horse shit like that. And so I was thinking, how am I going to tell this story and do it authentically? I want it to be real, but it was hard. I did like 3 drafts of the script, and I gave it to my wife Gwen, and I was, the third draft when I was finally like, I think it's good, And by the way, in the original thing, the character of Elder Allen, the main young guy, he was a baseball player. He had given up a chance to go play professional baseball to go on a mission. That seemed like a good dramatic story for me at the time. But my wife, who was very perceptive, she said, you know what, it's good, but it's missing something. And I said, what is it missing? And she says, it's missing some of you. It's just, it's a nice movie, but it's just missing you. And so I was trying to figure out what did she mean by that. And then it clicked, and I was like, oh, what she's saying is that it's not, I'm not being honest enough. I'm not being real enough. I'm being a little guarded. I'm trying to think too much about what Mormons want to see rather than what story I want to tell. And so I went back to the beginning, and I threw away the baseball stuff. And the big step for me was like, all right, this guy's coming not from a successful baseball career, but he's coming from a broken family where the father was a child molester. And it was like, okay, now we're in the real. And I knew as soon as I did that, I was like, man, I'm going to catch hell from my family. Like, this is going to be rough. And, but as soon as I made that decision, it was like, okay, we're in this now. And so I was honest, I threw in my own Carthage jail experience. I threw in all the doubts that I had, things I had struggled with, and tried to make sense of. And that's when, I gave it back to my wife, and she said, yeah, now it's good. And, yeah, so that's, I kind of forgot what you'd asked me now. I got carried away.
Well, I think you answered it perfectly. Yeah, certainly how to capture those moments. Yeah. Thank you, Eric.
Thank you, Richard.
Yeah. One thing I'm just excited about, though, and it's like, and for me, it's going back. One of the things that just thrilled me and energized me about, me in the late 1990s was, I wanted to tell these stories that other people weren't telling. And even though I'm not LDS anymore, and I'm not interested in, in promoting, that worldview anymore at all, or sharing it. But it's the same thing. It's like there are so few movies. If you start to think about when, I mean, almost all movies, if you think about it, they're almost all just commercial products. They're just trying to entertain people. It's this big stories and excitement and spectacle and sex and action and there are so few films and so few filmmakers who are interested in human spirituality and trying to explore it and depict it, and that's what really drives me, and so for me it's kind of weird. It's like I'm going back into spiritual filmmaking because that's still so it's so needed and it's so necessary, and it's like now I'm RFM, you told me, you talked to me about how you found it interesting how you could kind of track my own spiritual progress, or my evolution, maybe is a better way of saying it, through these films. And yes, you can, because as soon as I left Girl Crazy and the commercial filmmaking behind, and I started to realize I can use my filmmaking to inform my spiritual journey, and my spiritual journey can inform my filmmaking, and it was just kind of a rope that just continued, and it was the best time of my life. It was like I was able to just charge forward, and I was able to grow spiritually. Ironically, I grew out of the Mormon church, but I was able to. I probably wouldn't have if I hadn't been a filmmaker, but those two things were informing each other. And so the exciting thing for me now in my life is I'm back to that, except now I'm tackling a story that, and again, I'm tackling a story that nobody else is interested in telling. And I honestly don't think anybody can tell very well, because how many people know what this is? How many people who make films have been Mormon missionaries? Let me qualify that. How many people who can make good films were Mormon missionaries? How many of those left, and how many of them, understand what the born again experience is? How many of them understand that kind of intimate, deep, powerful, personal relationship with Jesus Christ? How many people understand that? So I'm excited, because it's like, what? I'm venturing into a project in an area that I'm going to be able to make a movie that, whether people like it or dislike it, it's going to be unlike anything they've ever seen before, and unlike anything that anyone's ever made before. And how many filmmakers can say that? I'm very, very, very blessed and excited to be doing this.
It is exciting.
It is very much so. I just want to make two comments here. First one is William Hurt. By the way, he's broadcast news, right?
Yeah.
I always get him confused with, I think it's John Hurt.
Yeah.
From Alien and many other things, including Harry Potter. But regardless, I think I can say without qualification that William Hurt, if you had gotten him, would not have done a better job than you did in that role and in that scene in the Sacrament meeting.
Wow. Thanks.
You nailed it. Could not have been done better, in my opinion.
Thank you.
The second thing is, I've been talking with a number of people about your movies, one of which is Maven, and harking back to the idea about, I'd rather have you come home in a box than dishonored. Maven made this really interesting comment to me. I think it was yesterday when we were talking on the phone, that had escaped me, and I wanted to bring her on so she could share it with the audience. Surprise, Maven.
Can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay. I had a notification earlier that my mic was like unplugged or something. So, so I guess the point that I had noticed with the quote about going home in a casket is that that's exactly what happens in the original God's Army with your character, Richard. Not for worthiness purposes, but, anyway, that was it.
Yeah.
No, I think it's great, because the elder in the second movie, God's Army 2, who tries to commit suicide, does not succeed and ends up alive and going home. There's only one person in all of your in the two movies. We'll take out Brigham City, because a lot of people die in that. But in the two God's Army and God's Army 2 movies, there's only one person who ends up going home in a box, and that is the most righteous missionary.
Well, there is somebody who you never see him go in the box, but there's a little bit of, there's some death and states of grace. There's a couple characters that die, but you don't see them in the box. You see them get killed. You just don't see them in the box.
With the drive-by shooting.
Yeah, the drive-by shooting and another one. So, well, yeah, I guess there's more. Wow, there's a body count in that movie.
Wow. But are any of them Mormon missionaries who die?
It's an action movie. Yeah, there's no other missionaries who die.
Yeah, I think it's just Elder Dalton is the only one who bites the dust.
It is really funny that people so often ask me if I'm in God's Army too, and my character, and it's like, well, you don't remember. I mean, I guess I could have come back as like Obi-Wan Kenobi or something, but yeah.
Oh yeah, at the end.
In Mormonism, anything's possible. I mean, the Angel Moroni, right? So
you just needed a Ouija board scene in there so you could communicate.
Couldn't pull that off. So.
All right. Well, I think we're done tonight. No more callers, right, Bill?
We're it. I ended the lines, so we are done, my friend.
Richard, thank you so much for coming on tonight to talk with us and our audience. And I really hope that everybody will take a long, hard thought about donating. And if you are in a position where you can make investments of the kind that are necessary for movies to be made and hopefully get a return on your money, please contact Richard Dutcher personally. He'll be glad to talk with you and answer any questions you might have about that.
Love it. Excited to see the new movie, Richard.
Thanks.
Yep.
It takes a long time to get a movie made, so don't expect it in the next few months. It'll be a little.
Well, plus the one you said you were going to release next year that you're holding on to.
That's true. That's
right.
So there's two on the way.
That's true.
Love it.
Thanks
Awesome.
again so much, Richard.
Yeah, thanks. It's been a blast.
Have a great night.
Thanks.